What makes an antagonist great? A ton of villains are intimidating, strong, smart, but still fall under mediocrity when compared to the best. So what's the factor that puts some above the rest? Parallels, dynamics, connections in general to the main cast, especially the protagonist, are almost a prerequisite for me to consider them one of the best. If a villain has no connection to the main cast, their relevancy is put into question, and the saying that a hero is only as good as their villain reigns true here. But some villains manage to take that to an extreme. Some villains, through their inclusion in the story alone, are able to improve the main cast and especially the protagonist's writing. Even more impressively, some series do this with their very first villain. Those characters being the Cloud Gouger's chosen wielder, Genichi Sojo, and JJK's prodigal curse, Mahito. Now, I mentioned that these two's inclusion in the story improve the main character's writing. While that rings true for a lot of villains, that's simply through contrast. Yuji and Chihiro simply wouldn't be as good of characters without their respective villains. And because of the fact this rings true more for Yuji than Chihiro, we'll start off with Sojo. Sojo is Kagurabachi's first real villain, with his introduction being in Chapter 5 and his end being in Chapter 18. He's a skilled and very determined swordsman, much like our main character, and the fact that he isn't in Chapters 4 or 16 means he's in a total of 11 chapters. This 11 chapter villain is one of New Gen's best. To figure out why I have this opinion of him, let's first look at his design. His hair is messy and unkempt, and his outfit is incohesive in certain areas. A pretty sharp difference from our stoic, pretty well-dressed main character. But the most important thing about his design is his weapon, Cloud Gouger. Cloud Gouger is one of the 6 enchanted swords made by Chihiro's father, Kunoshige Rokuhira. The whole reason for Kagurabachi as a series in the first place is to retrieve these 6 enchanted swords, so by Sojo being the very first one we see already gives us a strong impression. Off of that alone, we know in combat he'll be somewhat relative to our protagonist, and in one of his first appearances, he kills a random background villain who faced our protagonist in an earlier chapter, who with his sorcery was able to bring Chihiro down to his knees in a cold sweat, remembering the death of his father. And when that same villain tries that sorcery on Sojo, Sojo just ignores the depression. Sojo's clearly different from every other villain of the week we've seen so far, and he's made to be a clear threat in the audience's eyes. And immediately after this, he's put into combat with Chihiro. This first clash is extremely important for both characters. The reason being they both idolize Rokuhira, Chihiro's father. See, Chihiro idolizes him because he's his father. He's Chihiro's role model and main moral compass, while Sojo idolizes Rokuhira the blacksmith. When Sojo sees Enten, Chihiro's enchanted sword, he sees potential for a connection, someone who thinks the same way he does, who appreciates the same craft he does, and proceeds to ask Chihiro why he draws his sword, why he holds an enchanted blade. And Chihiro responds, to destroy evil, to save the weak. That is all it amounts to. A boring and ignorant answer. See, the difference in the way they see Rokuhira is that Sojo sees a blacksmith. He sees a craftsman. But Chihiro obviously sees his father, a compassionate and honest man who would never wish for the deaths his blades caused. To Chihiro, Sojo's just an ignorant murderer who can't comprehend that behind that blacksmith is a person with their own ideals and morality. While from Sojo's perspective, he sees an immature teenager waving a weapon of mass destruction, claiming it's not meant for murder. Chihiro is clearly biased, but he fails to see that the point of a blacksmith is to make a weapon, and that weapon is worthless if it can't kill. The purpose of making a stronger sword is making a more efficient killing weapon. And that's exactly what Sojo understands. These two have taken extreme different perspectives on the same man, and neither of them want to understand the other perspective, and that's why they clash. Because of the circumstances, and because Sojo's annoyed at this wannabe savior, he immediately attacks the civilians, which causes Chihiro to absorb his attack and almost pass out from it. Chihiro's in no shape to fight here, but he continues to, stalling long enough to get back up, and coming off launching his strongest attack, Sojo retreats. As they both recover from the battle, they begin to understand the other person's perspective, with this being symbolized later by them sharing a meal together during their second fight. And as their understanding of the enchanted swords grow, so do their skill with them. They handle their weapons with much more proficiency now that they have a better understanding of the craftsman, and this manifests into new abilities. Going ahead a few chapters, we finally see them clash with these new ideals and new abilities. As they stare their opponent down, they seep deeper and deeper into concentration, and in the span of a single panel, they vanish. Their fight has started, and in 12 seconds it'll end. In 12 seconds, they'll decide who truly understood Rokuhira. Sojo's existence forces Chihiro to evolve his understanding. It prompts him to change and become a better swordsman as a result. And we see this in the way he defeats Sojo at the end of chapter 18. I'd rather not explain how, partially because it'd be a long explanation, but also because this fight was gorgeous. Sojo's in 3 fights, Chihiro 1 and 2, as well as fighting against Azumi's crew, and the paneling, artwork, and choreography between these 3 fights are just so impressive to a new manga reader. It's really amazing to see a new author this skilled with their pen, both in their art and their writing, that they can create a character who is in 11 total chapters, give him 3 stunning fights, and make him evolve the MC. Now without Sojo, would Chihiro keep in that mindset of his father doing no wrong by creating the enchanted blades forever? Personally, I doubt it, but it's still so impressive to see these dynamics fully fleshed out in such a short amount of time. I believe Sojo's mentality can be summed up in one quote from him, back in chapter 8, where he says, "If you've chosen a path in life, at least commit one measly lifetime to it." We saw the path Sojo chose, and it's the one he decided to die following. And while his path gave his main character better perspective and allowed him to improve, there's another villain's actions who runs much deeper to their protagonist. Now, I'm gonna need everyone to let me cook when talking about Mahito. Yes, he is Yuji is him, but I want to delve into why this line works, and why without Sukuna or Mahito, Yuji, tomorrow's strongest sorcerer, would be a stagnant, surface-level character and wouldn't be the pillar of New Gen he is today. 2 aspects of their dynamic, and aspects of JJK in general, that I don't see talked about a lot is first, motivation, and second, the fact that Mahito's a mirror. After dying, Hanami states that Mahito is a mirror for all of humanity to peer into, and what's reflected is humanity's worst qualities. That's what Mahito is. He's the fear of other humans, the fear people have of each other, and especially the fear they have of themselves. Yuji being a prime example of the latter. Let me ask you, what does Yuji Itadori fear? He doesn't fear pain, he doesn't fear heights. You could argue earlier in the series he feared death, but within chapters we see him die with a smile on his face and his heart on the floor. Simply put, I think Yuji fears doing the wrong thing. He fears crossing some arbitrary and undefined line that in his eyes will make him a morally unjust person, not knowing that he already crossed this line when he killed Eso and Kechizu. I want to make it clear and remind everyone that this wasn't an exorcism, this was a murder. Yuji took 2 lives and tears were shed over those lives. The blood on his hands won't evaporate the same way a cursed spirits would. And at this point in the series, this is the second major hit he's had to his psyche. Now, let me ask you another question. What is Yuji's motivations in Season 1? To give people a proper death. And with Yuji's grandfather specifically, I think both Yuji and his grandfather himself wouldn't consider that a proper death. Old and frail, surrounded by none of your loved ones. But here's the thing about a proper death. You can have as many people as you want, but if you die at 20, you'll be hard-pressed to find someone who would consider that a proper death. There's an inherent flaw in Yuji's motivation, and it's the fact that it's undefined. Principal Yaga says this immediately after meeting Yuji, that if he died now, he may end up blaming and cursing his grandfather. Sorcery isn't something you do because someone else told you to. It's the willingness to become a weapon for your own motivations. And because Yuji has no real, grounded motivations, he is killing for the sake of killing. He's no different from Mahito in this sense, where he arbitrarily will kill who he feels deserves death. You could argue Yuji has a very clear and defined line that he won't kill humans and he'll only kill curses, but we see that isn't true with Eso and Kechizu. And I'm sure if you asked him if he wanted to kill Choso or Isukuna, he'd say yes. His view is very narrow, and both Jogo and Mahito's mentality give us a very interesting perspective. Curses are made up of humans' fear of Mother Nature, fear of natural disasters, the fear of humans. And there's an argument to be made that fear is the purest emotion someone can feel, the most untainted and honest emotion someone can feel. In this sense, I think this is why Jogo believes curses are the true humans. And I believe this mentality bled over into Mahito's impressionable mind, with him being under a year old, which is why he's a more grounded version of Yuji. Yuji and Mahito will kill as they feel is right, but because Mahito puts curses' lives above humans, while at the same time having an understanding for why Yuji would care so much for human life, he's also rooted in his motivation. He believes that what he is doing is innate to him. It's in his nature. Now, I'm sure if Yuji asked Mahito why you killed all my friends, Mahito replying, because I was born like this, wouldn't exactly satisfy Yuji. In the same sense, if Mahito asked Yuji why he saves people, Yuji wouldn't be able to give an answer that Mahito could accept and comprehend. They are reflections of each other. And when Yuji finally decides to accept that and ground himself in a new mentality, that is when he beats Mahito. These two have expanded my perspective on how a protagonist-antagonist dynamic is meant to work, because with so many other villains, you can completely detach them from the story and still roughly get the same protagonist. And even if they don't quite touch my top 3, they are comfortably the 2 best antagonists I've seen in a while.